Right.
All right, so we have kind of I'll call this a compound koan because there are koans within the koan that are of value. So it's a little long. So hang on. This is case 29 of the Book of Equanimity. Fuketsu's Iron Ox. Preface to the assembly. Playing chess slowly and dully rots the axe handle. Rolling the eyes and loosening one's head, the ladle is snatched away. When dwelling in a demon's cave and holding fast to a deadly snake's head, is there any chance of transformation? Okay, that's not the koan. So, all right, main case. Attention. When Fuketsu was staying in the governmental quarters at E Province, he ascended the high seat and said, "The characteristics of the ancestor's mind seal is like the functioning of the iron ox. Taking the seal off leaves an imprint. Leaving the seal on covers the imprint. But neither taking it off or leaving it on is it right to seal this, or right to not seal it?" At that, Venerable Rohi stepped forward and said, "I have an iron ox function. I beg you, Master, don't stamp your seal." Fuketsu replied, used as I am to scouring the ocean and catching whales, I regret that instead there's a frog floundering in the mud." Roki was bewildered. Fuketsu shouted, "Venerable one, why don't you proceed?" Roki hesitated. Striking out with his whisk, Fuketsu said, "Don't you remember the subject of our talk? Try, let's see." Roki started to open his mouth, and Fuketsu struck out with his whisk again. Then the governor, who was present, said, "Buddha Dharma and ruler's Dharma are one." And Fuketsu said, "What is it you see?" The governor replied, "If you don't cut off when you should cut off, you invite disorder." At that, Fuketsu stepped down from his seat. Appreciatory verse. The iron ox's function, leaving an imprint, covering the imprint. Leaving, he goes beyond even the top of Vairochana's head. Sitting, he comes back on the tongue tip of the Nirmanakaya, Buddha. Fuketsu checked the balance. Rohi met defeat. The stick above, the shout below, lightning flashes and flint sparks. Clear and bright, a pearl rolls upon the tray. Knit your brow, and you'll stumble. Got that? There's so much in this koan. But it is much, I think, this is, a little bias on my part. It's easier than it sounds. So let me explain for those of you who, some of you probably already know some of these references, but for those who don't. So first of all, an iron ox. An iron ox is a reference to and I printed it out because it's difficult for me to imagine what this is. So we're talking, this is 10th century, yes, 10th century, when this iron ox already existed. So an iron ox is it's a sculpture it is a famous iron sculpture that rests at the bottom of the Yellow River and is an anchor. It does two things. It anchors the pontoon bridges. You've seen pontoon bridges. They're the bridges that float on water. And there's always some kid who likes to run across it and make it bounce. And the rest of us are scared of falling in the water. And so it anchors those pontoons so that they don't float away. And it also helps regulate the tide of the river. It slows the tide down so that as the water is approaching, so that the iron ox will start some yards above where the bridge is anchored, help slow the tide down so it doesn't wash over the bridge and then extends beyond it. And then in the middle of that iron ox is our anchors that hold the bridge in place. So the metaphor is basically someone who anchors, who knows what is needed in every situation, and holds, it basically holds everything in place as the functioning of life rolls over them like the water over the iron ox. This seal of leaving an imprint or hiding the imprint is really talking about dharma transmission. So it's the mind-to-mind transmission and the teacher approves of the transmission or the enlightenment experience of the student, and they get a document that has a seal on it that says this person has achieved this level of enlightenment, and they're now authorized to teach. And in this audience was also a government official who basically saw in the exchange between Fuketsu and Rogi the same kind of dynamic that happens in any job, that you have to kind of evaluate whether or not an employee is doing well and is ready for more responsibility. And so the government is replying to what Rogi did. And now that exchange is what's important, what's going on. Because Fuketsu is basically saying, Fuketsu is basically asking the question and asking people to respond to, do you need dharma transmission, or do you need to be approved by someone else in order to live your life? Because dharma is just your life. And and Rogi, thinking that, okay, I'll give the teacher the answer that I think he's asking for, steps forward and says, I got this. No need for your permission, no need for your seal, no need for your transmission. And so Fuketsu tests him just to see how he's going to react under stress. So he basically says, oh, well, I'm used to dealing with bigger, better people, big whales. And now I've got this little frog floundering in the mud here. So Rogi fails this test because he reacts to it. It's like, okay, this is an example of what will happen when you are in real life. Because not everyone's going to like you, not everyone's going to approve of you, not everyone's going to think that you're all that in a bag of chips. So Rogi got his comeuppance, but Fuketsu persists. It says, it's okay, let's try this again. You remember what we were talking about? Please respond. Rogi can't. And so this is what the governor sees. It's like, okay, this guy's not ready. And this is what I have to do in my job as well. So there's no difference between the Buddha Dharma and the government Dharma, or the job Dharma, or any other Dharma in any other place. So that's what this whole exchange is about. Certainly when I was, when I was studying this koan, I was still working in HR at Kaiser, and I could see the direct relationship between, basically people coming in complaining about how their manager is treating them. And I had this one person come in at one point. He was just fit to be tied. He was really upset because he had not been promoted. So, and that was his complaint. I can't even remember. I think he was Asian. So of course his claim was that he was being discriminated against because of his race, and he should have been promoted. And my first question to him was, did you apply for the promotion? And the answer was no. And I looked at him and said, okay, so how is it you're being discriminated against if you didn't apply for the position and you weren't denied the position? And he goes, well, my manager didn't offer me the position. Okay, well, does your manager know that you're interested in the position? have you talked to him about it? No. Have you? And so I'm trying, not to laugh at him going, okay, dude, really, get it together. If the manager doesn't know that you want the position, you're coming to work every day and you're doing your job, you've never applied for the position, you've never been denied a position. First of all, you don't have a prima facie case for discrimination, and if you want to be promoted, you need to tell somebody that you want to be promoted, because people can't read your mind. So it looks like you're just coming to work and doing your job, and you're probably doing a good job, which is the least that's expected of you. So you were given a job, you're being paid to do a job, and you're coming in doing the job. Bravo! That's all we ask. So this expectation that you're going to get a promotion just because you come to work every day is a little misplaced, especially in the Kaiser system. So there may be other places where someone will see that you're an excellent employee and offer you some promotion. That doesn't happen in a system, especially a unionized system, where everything is done by the book and by the instructions or by the union, the way the union outlines it to be. You're not going to get anywhere unless you follow the rules. So he wasn't following the rules. He was kind of expecting to be leapfrogged out of these rules and be granted this grandiose position without anyone knowing that he is at all interested. Anyway, it took him a while to talk him off the high horse he had climbed up on, and I said, "Go tell your manager you want to be promoted. Then we'll see." If he then doesn't promote you and you're worthy to be promoted, that's another thing. And he did call back and he said, "Well, I did tell him," and the manager did pay him all kinds of compliments, but there was no position for him to be promoted to that was open. So he, I don't know what's happened to him since. This was years ago. Hopefully, now that he knew what he needed to do, he got promoted because he was probably an excellent employee. But what stops people from getting anywhere is their own expectations of how things should be, instead of dealing with things as they are. So that's the problem with transmission, is that people think that because you've had transmission in a certain lineage or because you've heard from a certain teacher, that it's rubber stamped, that you are just like that. Mind to mind mean that you're a carbon copy of your teacher, and that is not the case. As a matter of fact, that is the opposite of the case. The opposite, because basically there are no two teachers, there are no two people, there are no two situations that are exactly alike, and all this training is to deconstruct all of those expectations, leaving you open and free to deal with any situations as they are, not as you expect them to be, or not as someone else expected you to handle them, or handle them as someone else would have handled them. But you bring your true self to every single situation in every single minute of every single day, and you respond from that true self, from that space of enlightenment, because you have enlightenment. You're not getting it from outside. You're not getting it from any place else. You already have it. So it is deconstructing anything that is stopping you from that realization and responding authentically and truthfully and realistically to every situation from that space. So that's what that's all those words is what this whole koan is about. Poor Rohi, hopefully he learned later, but he wasn't ready because he got caught. He got by this kind of criticism. Used to dealing with whales, and I got a frog here in front of me. But the test is, if indeed you are out there and you're working or you're teaching or you're doing whatever you're doing, and someone dislikes you, someone makes fun of you, or someone puts down what you've done, someone criticizes you, how are you going to respond to that? And so we saw how Rohi responded. If he had taken that in stride, he would have just fallen down and rolled around in the mud like a frog. He said, "Frogs are good. The mud's good too. Nothing wrong with that. Don't need to be a whale. I am perfect just as I am. The situation is perfect just as it is. And if the situation requires that I get down in the mud and be a frog, that's what it calls for. And you do that. You do whatever it takes to take care of the situation as it is, not as you want it to be. I think he was expecting, because he basically takes Fuketsu's words and responds with those words, thinking he's going to be, piled on with praise and given this transmission. And say, oh, here's a good student of mine, and now you're ready to take on the world. But there's always a test. There's always the challenge, and life has these tests for you built in. Life is not always, peachy keen, smooth, and tickety boo, and all the other words that people use to describe being wonderful and fancy free. It comes with problems and trouble and disagreements and criticisms and all of those things that we all have to deal with. So how will you respond? How will you take on? How will you be that criticism and really respond authentically from your true self to those criticisms, those responses? And especially if you're in a leadership position, I do love the quote that Shishin puts in his commentary. When the king's name is not known, then there is harmony. The first line is, if the king's name is known, then the country is in disorder. When the king's name is not known, then there is harmony. And we often forget this, that the best thing for a manager to be is invisible, because the manager's job is to facilitate people getting their work done. And the example that he puts in here is such a manager that had basically made sure her department was functioning well and the productivity was high, but it's because she was making sure that everybody was taken care of. Addressing all of their personal issues, bringing in food, and letting them, enjoy what their work is. And so, because the upper management didn't know who she was, when it came time to do layoffs, they laid her off because they didn't think she did anything. And of course, the entire department fell apart as a result of, upper management, cutting off its nose to spite its face, as often happens in layoff situations. It is because it's, and I can tell you from my experience at Kaiser, much easier to lay off non-union salaried employees than it is to try to lay off union employees. So you go for the easier, management often makes that mistake of going for what's easy instead of really looking deep into what is, costing them unnecessarily and addressing those costs. Kaiser's gotten better about that over the years. So it's, I think they're in a much better position because they now have an entire department that does that analysis in departments, and since they're within Kaiser and not an outside agency, easier for them to see and evaluate, because the Kaiser system is very complicated. And whenever we've hired outside consultants, invariably it goes south. Because the outside consultants they just don't understand. They don't have the skin in the game to understand how how Kaiser functions. So, and there is no difference between the dharma for an employer or a government than there is for the Buddha Dharma. Reality is the same for both. And the ability to take care of reality is really what the key is. Because it is about that compassion, that taking care of in any situation. I would always tell people, invariably, for for Justin's benefit, since I've told the story a million times. I worked on the dark side of HR, so people, if they were in my office, they were in trouble. And so even if they were going out the door, my my point of view with both myself and dealing with employees and my consultants who reported to me, you want to make sure that people understand that even at termination, we're here, this is intended to help you. This is intended to help you not do what you did to get terminated here, and you don't take that to your new employer. So this is not personal. This is because you weren't doing the job that you were hired to do. And at Kaiser, this affects everything anyone does in Kaiser, no matter whether they touch patients or not, it affects patient care. So, and that's the ultimate goal, is taking care of the patients. And the only way we take care of patients well is if we take care of employees well. So that was the message. So that's this message as well. The governor, if you don't cut off what you should cut off, you invite disorder. So, Fuketsu very quickly realized Roki wasn't ready. So Roki needed more training. So, not a slight to Roki at all. This is just where he was. This is the reality of how he responded to a little bit of metaphysical criticism. It wasn't even direct. Fuketsu didn't say, "No, dude, you're not ready." He basically said, "You're a frog. Now what?" So how do you respond to being a frog? And if you can't take on and compassionately take care of being a frog, how can you then take care of the whale? So that's the essence of this koan. It's so convoluted. Try to get that out of that text takes a little bit of work.
WaYu?
Yes.
So, what is the meaning of the sentence that says, "I have an iron ox's station. I beg you, master, don't snap your steel."
Yeah, he's basically saying, because in the previous line, the characteristics of the ancestor's mind seal is like the functioning of the iron ox. So Roki is now claiming, oh, I can do that. I can function like the iron ox because I can function as if I have the ancestor's mind seal, so I don't need it. I don't need your seal. I don't need your approval, because I'm just as good as those who have been sealed. Because this imprint is kind of a very tricky thing for teachers to deal with, because you don't want to produce carbon copies of yourself. You want to produce someone who can stand on their own, that can stand in their own truth. So if indeed, certainly taking the seal off leaves an imprint, and yes, we're all affected by those who came before us, the teachers we've had, the lessons we've learned. There's no getting out of the fact that we are imprinted on by that which has taught us and we've learned from. There's no, but leaving the seal on, or making or trying to create a student who is just like you, covers the imprint. So they're really not having a chance to learn how to stand on their own. So that's really what that is referring to. But neither taking it off or leaving it on is it right to seal this. So do we really need dharma transmission? And it's a formal process through which teachers are granted permission to teach by their teacher. And are there wonderful Dharma students and Dharma teachers who learned on their own? Yes. And And certainly, the Buddha is an example. He took on that challenge. He didn't get approved by by a Buddhist teacher because he was the first. Um, but he did get approved by, because he studied every religion that was available at the time. He comes from a Hindu background. He studied Jainism. And there were a number of other various religions that were available to him, and he chose to do the ascetic practices. But he went against those ascetic practices by, first of all, drinking the milk after he got pulled out of the river, and then going and finding a whole other way, the middle path, that didn't require these extremes that the ascetics were engaging in. And the first people he had to go teach were the other ascetics, who probably thought, he's a heretic at this point. But that was his challenge. And that enlightenment experience wasn't complete until he got up out of, from under the Bodhi tree and went and taught. So that's the mind seal, and that's what has been passed down to us, was standing in your own truth, or sitting until you have the realization that you need, that you require, because he was not satisfied with the practices of the other religions that he had studied, and he wasn't going to get up from under that Bodhi tree until he discovered what was real, discovered what was truth for him. Did that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, so the mind seal that you referred to here is adherence blindly to the dogma.
No, the mind seal is dharma transmission. So expecting that the mind seal is something is that blind adherence. So the mind seal is not intended to photocopy, if you will, students. The mind seal doesn't say you're just like your teacher, because all the Dharma successors of Maezumi Roshi are all very different, sometimes wildly different, than Maezumi Roshi was, and that was his intent, that they bring themselves, they bring their true selves, and all of their various predilections to bear, because it's there are different people out there. People need to hear the Dharma in a way that they can get it, and that's going to be in different ways. It's not all the same.
Good,
Does that help?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Other questions, comments, disagreements, dissensions?
Lots of funny stuff. There's a big difference between a mind field and a mind field. A mind field and a mind field.
Yes.
He was a pretty good frog, I mean, he got in the book,
He did. He did. So he's famous. 1,500 years later. And a valuable lesson. Sometimes these koans teach us how, not to be. The mistakes, the mistakes are valuable in that sense.
Not having not studied the koan, is there an obvious mistake there, or is it just the process that reveals something?
The only thing that you could call a mistake is the fact that he couldn't respond to Fuketsu's request after Fuketsu criticized him.
Yeah, it has to be some kind of word of zen somewhere.
Yeah, well, he should have heard Fuketsu's challenge as a koan. So that's the koan within the koan.
Okay.
So when he says, "Used as I am to scouring the ocean and watching and catching whales, I regret that instead there's a frog floundering in the mud."
At that point, he should have become...
Yeah, Rohi should have taken it on and said, Okay, yeah,
Mhm.
I'm the frog.
Yeah.
But his reaction is that he's bewildered because he didn't get the praise that he wanted.
So the observation from the outside becomes
Yeah,
the more important.
that's the stumbling block.
Yeah.
He had expected, I'm giving Fuketsu what he wanted. I'm answering. I'm responding. I don't need to be sealed. You don't have to seal me. You don't have to give me dharma transmission. I am already operating as this iron ox. I am the foundation that, this must have been I mean, the Yellow River. I understand is quite large. I've never been to China, so I'm only imagining that in the 10th century, building this iron ox must have been quite a feat.
Engineering masterpiece.
Yeah. So he's basically saying, I'm already this engineering masterpiece, so I don't need you, teacher. And, figuratively sets him straight.
Mm-hmm.
The Yellow River is China's sorrow.
Hmm?
The Yellow River is China's sorrow. It's the main river. It floods and wrecks everything
Oh, really?
over and over and over.
Oh, okay. Kind of like what the Nile does. And
Well, the Nile's beneficial.
oh, the Yellow
The
River is
floods-
not.
The Yellow River floods and death and
Destroys
destruction.
everything. Oh my. Okay.
I think the ancient times the Nile was very predictable. It flooded a certain amount at a certain time of year, so and it brought the nutrients and the fertilizer up to the banks, and
Yeah.
it became the breadbasket of the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
While the Yellow River was unpredictable, it flooded randomly, and a lot of the myths in Chinese history have to, like the first emperor was building anti-flood works and other stuff, so the whole civilization kind of flooding, catastrophic floods were very prominent in its history and culture.
That's the reason for the iron ox, to kind of control that flooding.
I don't know.
Yeah. I'll have to do some more research on that. I'm not sure.
But I think that's where the Three Gorges down on the Yellow River, I think.
That's what?
But the Three Gorges down, the huge dam, I think that's
Oh,
I
that's
think
that's on the Yellow
That's on
River.
the Yangtze. That's not on the Yellow River.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay.
The Yellow River's up north. That's the more cradle, and the Yangtze's further south.
Okay. Oh, you're right, because it's Bodhidharma that crossed the Yangtze on a blade of grass. It's a metaphor because there were boats that were called blades of grass because of their shape. They're long blades of grass, but it was it was not a literal blade of grass. So yeah, that was the Yangtze. So that would have been south because he landed in South China, coming from India. Okay, so I'll actually have to study the geography of China. I've never looked at it. All right, so how does this apply to your everyday life? That's the job of this koan, is how do you take this, and the other references to Vairocana and Nirmanakaya are key in this. He goes beyond even the top of Vairocana's head, and the Vairocana is considered the sun Buddha, around which all the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas encircle. So to go above the topmost Buddha is what this is saying. Sitting, he comes back to the tongue tip of the Nirmanakaya Buddha. The Nirmanakaya Buddha is the actualized Buddha, the Buddha that is actually living in the world and spreading the Dharma to in everyday life. So he's got all that going on. The iron ox's function, leaving an imprint, covering the imprint, leaving. He goes beyond even the top of Vairocana's head. Sitting, he comes back to the tongue tip of the Nirmanakaya Buddha. Fuketsu checked the balance. So Fuketsu's checked Rohi for his abilities, and Rohi met defeat. So he failed that test, but hopefully he learned. I don't know that we know anything beyond this koan, what happened with Rohi. It's the only mention of him in this book. But we don't know very much about anybody from that time. Our knowledge of their, because they Zen people don't write stuff down, so we're lacking in a lot of information about these. We have the koans, and that's about it. The stick above and the shout below, lighting flashes. So the stick above and the shout below. These are because Fuketsu was in Renzai's line. So Renzai always used the shout, and he would literally attack his students. Then Fuketsu's style of teaching was using his whisk, because he did check Rohi, because he wouldn't let Rohi get away with it. Rohi hesitated. I regret that instead there's a frog floundering in the mud. Rohi was bewildered, and Fuketsu shouted, "Venerable one, why don't you proceed?" Rohi hesitated, striking out with his whisk, meaning it's a horse whisk, so he hits him with the ends of the horse whisk. Then and Rohi tries to speak, but speaking was not what was required, and so he starts to make yet another mistake, another evidence that he's not ready, and Fuketsu helps him along by saying, respond without talking. But he can't in this case. It doesn't mean he didn't get it later. I'm going to trust that he did. But it's at that point, but Fuketsu cut him off. It wouldn't let him make any more mistakes, and to guide him back to what he should be doing as a Dharma student. And the governor sees this interchange and says, "Okay," he cut him off. Sometimes I have to do that too. I have to cut people off because they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, not saying what they're supposed to be saying. And the hesitation, because the response needs to be instant. Any response to any situation that needs your care, needs your attention, needs your compassion, needs to be without hesitation. You step into it, you take care of it. You become the situation. His failure to become the frog, in this case, because that's what he was offered. He's being told, "You're a frog." It's like, be the frog. And there's nothing wrong with a frog floundering in the mud. But he resisted that characterization. So, not ready for any situation yet. Needed some more work, some more time. And I'm going to assume the best. He got it and became a great teacher. And at some point was deeply enlightened.
WaYu?
Yes.
What about the backward step? In some situations, the best thing is to just take a step back and just consider what's going on.
Yes. But the backward step for him would have been being the frog, in this case. Because he was basically announcing, I'm good enough to be out on my own as a teacher. That's what he's saying. I have the functioning of the iron ox. I'm ready to be this great engineering feat that anchors bridges and controls the tides. Certainly Fuketsu was saying, "Oh yeah, well, I'm used to catching people who operate at that capacity, but that's not what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing frog that is not quite there." So his backward step should have been owning the fact that he wasn't quite there, and that he really needed to take more time, take more consideration, learn more about himself, about who he was and what his capacity was. He obviously had some exaggerated idea. Had he taken that backward step and owned that, then I suspect that Fuketsu would have said, "Okay, you are ready. You were able to do that. You were able to be that flexible. But if you're stuck in some idea of your own capacity, And that's what you're trying to forward in any situation. Instead of meeting that situation where it is as it is, that's the key difference in this case. So that's the whole function of these koans is to present the Dharma from all these different perspectives. So this is this one perspective that is happening in this exchange. So it doesn't apply to all perspectives because all perspectives are different. But in this case, Roki wasn't ready. But Fuketsu didn't give up on him. He gave him 2 opportunities, and I suppose more. You know, because he was Fuketsu's student, so Roki had more opportunities after this to, you know, refine his experience, his direct experience of the Dharma. Right. Any other questions, comments, discussion? All right. Well, we got through this. This was a hard one. So what's next? Oh,
That didn't sound good.
yeah. The next one's even harder. We'll tackle that one next week.
Appreciate it.
All right. Any final comments before we close?
It made no sense without your help.
A lot of them are I don't like the word difficult. They're dense. You know, there's a lot there. But once you take it apart, it starts to make sense. You know, they're not as hard. Certainly, if you know, as compared to, you know, a bedtime story, it's hard, but worth the effort. But I think that, you know, the trick is just basically studying it, kind of understanding the metaphors and what they're really pointing to, and really embodying it, because these are not just stories from dead people. This is how, yeah, they apply to right here, right now, and how does that function in that life? How am I Roki? How am I Fuketsu? How am I the iron ox or not the iron ox? How am I the floundering frog or not the floundering frog? How am I the government official that needs to cut people off sometimes? So all of those characters, it's being all aspects of that koan and looking at it from all those different, and then it begins to make sense.